Parents kicked me out at 16 to make room for sister's new baby. I posted about their neglect online and dad begged when rich grandparents threatened his inheritance. I, 16F, turned 16 just a week ago. There was no party, no celebration, and my parents barely even wished me before kicking me out of their house. The reason behind it was my older sister, Amanda, 22F. She's pretty much my parents' favorite and has always been for some reason. She's 7 months pregnant right now, and since we have a house with 4 bedrooms, my parents sat me down on the morning of my birthday to inform me that they now wanted me to move to my aunt's house so the new baby could have the room. My parents have never really cared about me and have always done the bare minimum when it came to me, but this was shocking even for me. I hardly expected anything from them and they were still letting me down somehow. They were very serious throughout the conversation, so I didn't think even for a second that they might have been joking or this might have been a pathetic attempt to prank me or something. After they were done explaining to me that they'd need the new room and that I was apparently old enough to move out, we just sat there in silence for a while. They'd told me that they would still take care of all my expenses until I turned 18 and make sure I was well fed and looked after, but they just couldn't keep me with them in the same home anymore. I didn't want to argue, but I did ask them why they couldn't just use the guest room for the nursery, and they told me, after some hesitation, that they'd use that for Amanda's boyfriend to stay with them. So to sum it up, my parents had a room of their own, my sister and her boyfriend had a room, and her baby would get its own room. Amanda wasn't at home, and I could tell that this was on purpose so she wouldn't have to watch this happen and feel guilty. My sister and I were never close because of the age gap, but she'd never really been awful to me either. We were civil to one another for the most part, but if she was okay with this arrangement and actually wanted me to leave the house so she could accommodate her new baby and boyfriend, then maybe she wasn't the person I'd thought she was. I was disappointed, and even more so because it was my birthday, but I didn't say a word to them and just agreed to leave. By now I've realized that my parents are a lost cause. There's nothing I can say to them to make them love me, and I've accepted that by now. So after they told me that they wanted me to move out and live with my aunt, I went up to my room and started packing. They helped me pack, but I think that was just to help me get out quickly. After I was done, they even dropped me at my aunt's house and were very happy talking to me throughout the car ride, but didn't notice that I wasn't responding and was just silently staring out of the window. Once we got there, they dropped me off at the door and didn't even hug me or kiss me before leaving. My aunt welcomed me happily because she actually does enjoy my company, and as far as I know, she loves me more than my own parents do. I talked to her, and after a while, I told her how disappointed I was with what my parents were doing. She was caught off guard when I said that and asked me to repeat whatever I'd told her, so I repeated everything that had taken place that morning, and her smile was instantly replaced with a frown. She didn't say anything to me but grabbed her phone and said that she had to make a call and went to the other room. I didn't hear anything for some time, but then I heard the sound of my aunt fighting on the phone in a high voice, and that's rare because my aunt rarely ever screams at people and she's a really soft-spoken person, so I knew someone must have pissed her off pretty bad for her to lose her temper like this. Then she came back to the room, all red in the face and still looking very annoyed, and I learned that it was apparently my parents who had pissed her off so badly. So my dad, her brother, had told her that I'd actually suggested this arrangement for the sake of the baby, and I was completely happy moving out of my childhood home to live with my aunt. This is why she'd been okay with taking me in as well, since she could tell I'd never really been happy living with my parents, and me making a suggestion like that didn't seem too odd to her when my dad was trying to convince her to take me in. She's a single woman in her late 30s and has no intention of getting married or having kids, so letting me live with her was just like having a roommate for her, and she didn't have to worry about the cost of me living here either, since everything that I needed would be paid for by my dad. My aunt liked me and she thought that I was the one who wanted to live with her, so she agreed to this arrangement. But now that she knew the truth, she'd called my father up to confront him about it because what they'd done was messed up and she had to give them a piece of her mind. After the phone call, she was really upset, and so was I, because this was something I don't think any other kid my age goes through often. I'd always known they liked my sister more than me, but this was a little extreme. They'd literally lied to my aunt to cover this up because they knew how insanely horrible this was. They'd literally chosen to give up their guest room for Amanda's boyfriend, who's in his 20s, has a job, and lives in his own apartment. If they wanted to make it work, Amanda could have easily moved in with her boyfriend, but it was at my parents' insistence that she'd been living at home because they wanted to be closer to her, and they were ready to even sacrifice my comfort just to keep her close. I was very hurt, and so I decided to go online and expose my parents for whatever they'd been doing. I didn't know if my aunt would be on board with it or not, so I waited for her to leave the room for a nap, and then I took out my phone, typed out the whole thing, and posted it without thinking. I'd mentioned not only the events of that day itself, but also how my parents have never treated me fairly and that I've always been considered nothing less than a second-class citizen in my own home. I kind of had a breakdown while typing it all out, and the post was not just me exposing my parents, but it was also kind of emotional, and by the time I posted it, I was in tears. I switched off my phone after that for some time because I was scared of the repercussions that this was bound to have. An hour or so passed and I tried to read a book but couldn't focus, and then my aunt woke up, rushed into the living room where I'd been sitting ever since I arrived at her house, and she asked me calmly if I'd posted something. I truthfully told her that I had, and that was it. There was no further discussion about it.